Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today, I would like to talk about healthcare and the politics of healthcare. Doing so, of course, in front of this sad pony poster, so you know that we're serious. Yeah, the healthcare stuff. Every single time that the new enrollment comes around now for Obamacare, we see a lot about healthcare. Right now, I'm not seeing a lot of that stuff in the news, but I have been talking to someone a little bit. I met a lady whose parents are not presently insured. They are self-employed, and they find it cheaper to just take the tax penalty for now. At some point, that tax penalty is going to increase enough that they'll have to probably get on insurance, or it'll be a huge financial hit. But there's still a lot of people who are uninsured in America today, and one of the most interesting things about our system is that it is completely broken. It is absolutely crushing the economy. We are between 2 and 4 times more expensive than just about anywhere else in the world. And it is absolutely ludicrous. Our entire healthcare system is totally ludicrous. And part of the issue is that a lot of people don't actually understand what's going on or why it is so expensive. They think that, for example, the insurance companies are somehow just gouging prices, and if we could just get them to control their ridiculous insurance prices, their ridiculous corporate greed, then we would have a solution. But actually, it's far, far worse than that, because this is an American problem. This is a problem with dozens and dozens of different lobbyists and all kinds of messes, and America's a big place, so the problem's very regionally. One of the things that you run into, actually, is that there are different kinds of regional monopolies. Just like we all hate Comcast and other ISPs because they often control one specific area that we live in. You move into a place and they say oh, who's my internet provider? What are my options? And they say Comcast. Also, they've got a data cap, and they charge all these ridiculous fees, and there's no competition, so they can just do this, and so you can like that, or you can not have internet. Those are your choices. And of course, we all need internet, so you're stuck. There are things like that with insurance, for example, and what'll happen then is usually you'll get some kind of insurance program, and they're very, very big, and they're very, very wealthy, and they'll start making contracts with all the local doctors' offices and everything basically in a city, and they kind of take over. It becomes the only insurance that ever gets any kind of good deal becomes this one particular insurer, or they make some kind of deal with all the local employers or something like that. In some way, they manage to grab control of an entire market, a whole area of market, and then they essentially control prices. And at that point too, they can gouge just about anybody. They can put the hurt on just about anybody. But they're weird. You actually don't see quite as much trouble from insurers as people give credit for. What's really interesting about this is that one complaint that you'll hear in the healthcare debate is that people are completely detached from how money is actually handled in the healthcare system. And this is absolutely true. I used to work in a pharmacy, and so I used to get to see these behind-the-scenes pricing schemes and some of the weird stuff that went on. And people would get upset, their drug would come in and it would be oh, they raised my copay to $50, it used to be $30 and stuff like that. And you would see that what had happened is one company had bought an old drug and then just jacked up the price, because it was a leader in its industry, and they're just just arbitrarily raise prices on this drug. And, you just have all these weird pricing things. And it's not just the drugs, it's also you get this weird stuff with government plans and things like that, TRICARE, Medicare, Medicaid, that they pass these laws, and then they do incredibly weird things. So, for example, Medicaid. People would come in to buy pills with Medicaid, and some people get, they're oh, I need the name brand. And you say, why do you need the name brand? They say, well, only the name brand works. The generic drugs don't work. And you say, well, no, the FDA, goes through a pretty rigorous testing process, and da-da-da-da-da. And they're the FDA is crap. Only the name brand works. And so it's kind of funny. They trust the marketing of the company that sells this name brand drug, but they don't trust the marketing of the, the FDA or whatever. They just kind of picking and choosing who they trust, even though really they shouldn't. If you can't trust the government, you really probably shouldn't trust corporations either, in my opinion. But I feel like you've got to put some faith in everything or no faith in anything. That's how I look at it. But anyway, though, if they tried to get a name brand, then you found that the insurance, the government was bound from negotiating prices, and then therefore the pharmacy was prevented from negotiating prices. And so we got this weird thing where we would sell the government at this unusual cost, and there was a percent, depending on the drug, the pharmacy would take a loss, if it was selling stuff. So we used to actually like throw those customers out if they came in with a government program and they were like, no, I refuse the generic. Then we would say, oh, well, then we refuse your service. And people would think that was illegal, but it's actually not. Like we can refuse to sell you a more expensive version of your drug. You can, it's not like we're preventing you from getting the medicine. We're just preventing you from getting the name brand medicine. Unless you show up with a doctor's note that explicitly says you can only take the name brand, but that's a different thing entirely. So you get these weird things. And there's a reason for that, and that's because essentially our entire healthcare system is just riddled and corrupted with lobbying. That should come as a surprise to nobody at all. But one of the things that came up about the Obamacare stuff, and you hear so much misinformation about Obamacare, but Obamacare actually first set out, and it was a real plan to try and fix our healthcare system. In fact, one of the things that was going to happen was they were actually going to have a single-payer system. A lot of people ask, why is there not a single-payer system? This was written in the original draft of the law, which went to the Senate, and it looked like they were going to have a single payer. And a lot of Democrats were saying, this law basically has no teeth unless we have a single-payer option. So it was going to be that you could go on Obamacare, and there was just going to be a government Obamacare thing that you could just sign up for, and it would be like Medicare or Medicaid or whatever, with all the corruption and politics that entails, but still, basically, a option that might have had the most possible bargaining power. Weirdly enough, though, from what I've read, and I don't know if this is specifically true, but from what I've read, Joe Lieberman was the one who personally killed the single-payer health thing. This was a Democrat. It got to the floor, and then Joe Lieberman, in the interest of his constituents and his lobbyists, shot down the single-payer thing because he wanted insurance companies to remain competitive. Either that, or he didn't want drug companies to have to argue with the government or something like that. Whatever it was, he was protecting somebody. He was protecting some kind of corporate thing, and so he shot this down. He took it out of the Senate bill. And then when the bill actually moved to Congress had all kinds of problems with it, among which was that there was no single-payer option. And so they were kind of furious about a lot of the weird things that they put in. Like, they also tried to get, some kind of weird kickback for Nebraska, and, a couple of other things. There was just some bizarre politics that went into the bill. And while Congress was arguing about it, what happened was the Democrats lost a Senate seat. Congress was sitting there and they're trying to revise, and they're like, we're going to send this back to the Senate and we're going to get much better stuff going on. And then the Democrats lost a Senate seat. So they're sitting there with this bill, and it's got a bunch of really stupid stuff in it, and it's been gutted from what they originally intended. And now they can't send it back to the Senate, because if they do, there's one more Republican there, and the Republicans will just kill the bill. That was the plan. That's what the Republicans were saying they were going to do. So their option was they could pass this complete cluster of a bill as it was, and just say okay, all right, we're not going to get all these provisions that we needed or wanted for reform, but we'll at least have passed the bill. Or they could scrap the idea entirely and not reform healthcare at any time in the near future. So what they did wind up doing is they did wind up just going ahead and ramming the bill through without any of the negotiations that they wanted. They managed to get a few things. And this is why we have Obamacare today, which has felt like a betrayal for a lot of people, because initially, a lot of people wanted real reform. They wanted to get actual cost controls on things, and they didn't get them. One of the things you hear about that is in there that was interesting, and they tried to kill this, was they tax medical devices now. And this is the weird thing that you get when it comes to lobbying, is that everybody's mad about Obamacare. Everybody is mad about it. I think whether you're Democrat or Republican, somebody is mad about something in Obamacare. And there's good things that it's done that should stay, and there are bad things that it's done that should be thrown out. But everybody's mad about it. And this is because of the way that the whole lobby system actually works. You get into government, and the big problem that they have is not that corporations are paying congressmen to do just one particular thing. It's not like Comcast or United Health or whatever walks into Congress and they just throw down a big sack of money and they say, pass this law. This is what you're going to do. That doesn't happen. What you actually get instead is that, Pfizer or United Healthcare or a huge collection of drug companies or whatever will come in and they'll say, don't put that in that law. And then the congressman will sometimes say, well, screw you, we're going to put this in this law. And then the drug companies will turn around and they'll pick up that money that they were going to give to the congressman, and they'll turn around, they'll walk out the door, they'll go down to a local television station and they'll start running ads villainizing your congressman for passing this law. They say, jobs being killed, government takeover of healthcare, da-da-da-da, and it's all just like this doom and gloom, and they swear up and down that your congressmen are, like smothering children and feasting on kittens and so on and so forth, and people really believe it. So politicians get put in this sort of rock and a hard place. As every now and then people jokingly, they're like, oh, Greg for president, whatever, is a sensible, level-headed guy. And this is actually, I would run into the same problems even if I got into government, is that if I went out and I did something that I thought was really genuinely beneficial, I would be facing the backlash of the corporate entities that I offended. So they did this. This was during the entire Obamacare thing. You saw that they were initially making a bunch of pushes to regulate some things that needed to be regulated. And then Obamacare was in the news. It was on the television. You saw all these commercials, like death panels. They were talking about death panels. There were all these things, all these like rumors and just, slander, essentially, just trying to destroy this law because it was going to regulate away a lot of really, really profitable abuses. So It's kind of weird. This is one of the biggest things to keep in mind whenever you see like a major law or a major regulation, or you're looking at something and you're just saying like, man, this is a problem with our country. Why can't we fix it? Because as soon as it goes to be fixed, pretty soon everybody hears that the regulation is going to kill everybody. And I mean, expect that. Like if we ever get a regulation that fixes our problem with like internet service providers having like crippling monopolies over areas, expect to see like, government takeover of your phone lines, whatever, like, oh, think about this, and they're listening in on your lines, and da-da-da. It'd be so easy. Like, people distrust government very easily. So you'll see all kinds of propaganda, and you'll probably wind up with, like, a weird, unexpected public pushback, and they will fight to defend Comcast. It'll be this weird about face. And this is kind of why also, too, our politicians develop so much audacity sometimes when it comes to helping corporations. It's just like, if I help the corporations, they give me money. If I help the people, they kick me out of office. There's this sort of terrible hostility that's developed as a result of the way that you can kind of play people off your politicians when they try to fix things. But anyway, though, getting further into the actual healthcare stuff and why it's all a mess, a lot of people, they blame their insurers. And I brought up earlier that people blame their insurers because the insurer is like who you talk to for money. Nobody actually knows how pricing works. But you pay your insurer, like you get a bill from them, every single month, presumably, you pay them a certain amount of money, and then you get sick, and you tell your insurer, hey, like I got sick, you're supposed to pay for this, and they say, no, this is a business, like this is not charity, this is a business. Like what, if you wanted like a cost-effective thing, then we'd have to have single-payer healthcare, but we're never going to have that, so I have to make money off of you. Like, no, I'm not going to pay for your healthcare needs. And people get furious because the whole thing kind of feels like a scam. And truth be told, in my opinion, yes, the single-payer system is absolutely stupid. The only reason we still have it, ironically, because of the... it was actually, in the past, it was actually a Democrat thing to try to keep the system the way it was because it was a union thing to keep healthcare the way it was, which was to say a mess. Unions they used to promote themselves by saying like, hey, like we argue on your behalf, we got you a healthcare plan, we forced your company to pay for your healthcare, join our union, this is what we'll do for you. And so it used to be a point of union politics, which means that they would appeal to the Democrats, and then the Democrats would fight to keep healthcare screwed up as it was. So that's one reason why we have the privatized healthcare, because for a long time unions fought to keep it. Now that unions are all dying, then we don't really have very many anymore, and like every company just offers healthcare as a sort of matter of course. Now the Democrats are kind of looking at it and they're saying like, oh, well, this is an issue that we can champion. And so they're kind of championing it a little bit, just not very well all the time. Anyway, so yes, that's why we have it in the first place. But nobody actually knows what's going on except for like you pay bills to your health insurance. So they fight you. They try to maintain they want to make a profit off of you. And so this makes people furious. And so everybody hates the insurance companies because that's who you deal with. And the whole system is absolutely screwed up. I mean, like when you think about, any kind of procedure costing like 4 times as much as it would if you went to, say, England or Canada or anywhere else, really realistically, people should be furious just about any time they got any kind of medical bill. I mean, it should be like if we didn't have insurance, people would be up in arms. Like, I mean, they would be burning down hospitals for the ludicrous amounts that they charge. You hear about this every now and then, like charge master prices. If you go to a hospital, they'll charge you like $400 for a tablet of Tylenol or something like that if you don't have insurance. Like if you need a little checkup, you go to the hospital, you need a little checkup, they'll charge you like $4,000 for the checkup. But it'll just be something like, like, oh, like you just came down with something and you were worried about it. Like you thought it was more serious than it was, and you just go in, they're like, oh, don't worry about it, it's just an ear infection. And you got really dizzy because it screwed up your inner ear. I mean, like you're not dying from a blood clot or anything like that. $4,000, please. And then you're stuck paying this $4,000 bill for, diagnosis of an ear infection. And that's because like sitting on the hospital bed, right off the bat cost you $2,000, something like that. So just there's astronomical prices, and people kind of argue, well, there's this weird politics involved in like pricing and things like that makes this okay. And the truth is that actually hospitals are one of the major culprits for why our healthcare system is so screwed up. Just like the insurance companies, like I mentioned, you can have a monopoly. Actually, hospitals can and frequently do develop regional monopolies. What you'll find that they'll do, and it may be difficult to tell sometimes because they don't really give any indication, but what may happen is a hospital can do so well, they can pull in so many profits that they start to buy up other hospitals, and also they'll buy like regional clinics. So if there's there's an emergency clinic or whatever downtown, like an urgent care center or whatever that you could go to when you just come down with a GI infection or something like that, then they buy that. And they just leave it named the same. You don't know it's owned by this hospital, but they just buy this deal. And then your family practice, your local family practice, is bought by a hospital. It's owned by this massive chain. And so it becomes this giant corporate structure. And very few people are aware of it. They don't really see this giant corporate structure and think, oh, this is like the McDonald's of healthcare. Which is to say, this is like the not so high quality, this is crappy. It'll be good healthcare. I mean, depending on whether or not it's a good facility or whatever. But still, it's just a giant corporate thing, even when they're nonprofit. Actually, especially when they're nonprofit. And so they just buy up everything. And once they get this monopoly, to where basically all the healthcare in an area is under control of one giant corporate structure, then they start to develop a lot of leverage with their pricing, and you start to see prices just go up and up and up. And they start really screwing with all the local health insurers. And so if you live in a place like this, you'll find that your health insurance prices are going up, 30% every single year, And people see that and they think my health insurance is at it again, they're screwing me, because that's who you get the bill from. You get your health insurance bill and they say, I need 30% more money. And you're just furious. You're like, what is this? 30%? How did healthcare, 30%? And you can look it up, and nationally, healthcare costs didn't increase, 30%, but you'll find that regionally, they absolutely did. There's some kind of monopoly thing going on, and people aren't, they're not directly involved in the pricing, so they just raise prices 30%, and the insurer then has to bite the bullet and take the brunt of the anger for that. So insurance was one of the major things that got reformed by Obamacare, and that was because insurance essentially, they were hated politically, and they couldn't persuade people to believe that they were the good guys by any stretch of the imagination. But meanwhile, though, doctors and things like that, doctors are lifesavers, ambulances are lifesavers, specialty clinics, they're lifesavers. They examine your poop to find out what's wrong with you. If you have a problem, they look at your poop, and that is a amazing thing. Kind people, those guys that look at poop. But they also charge ludicrous prices. They're running they're just scam, racket prices. Like I say, four times what they should be charging and higher, going up every single year. It's just insane. It's out of control. People who own those chains, the most unscrupulous of them anyway, are just making in a fortune. And of course, it's not just the hospitals and the when I say it's doctors, it's weird. You can't just go down and meet I'm a family practitioner, or just find the nurse and just be oh, you must be making billions, because they're not. It's really kind of these few people who oh, I own this whole chain of hospitals or whatever, but they're major players, and they're just this is what the prices are gonna be. And so you have a lot of doctors and nurses kind of below them. So it's not really nurses and doctors that you need to come after, but rather sort of the corporate structures that control all these things and give them the ability to be ludicrously expensive. But of course, it's not just the hospitals and everything else. You also get into drugs, And there was this guy that got really popular for a while because he bought a drug and then he just made it like 1,000 times more expensive than it was, an AIDS medication. And these guys are the same way. They're constantly campaigning. We want longer copyright laws, longer patent laws. Like we're developing things and we just want everything to last forever. Like if we make a drug, we want it to be name brand forever. And the government occasionally just goes, yeah, okay, yeah, copyright law should be extended, yeah, this and that. And they just keep doing this over and over again because you get the same thing with the lobbying, where they come in and they say, pass this law. And then Congress says, this will be awful for everybody. And then they say, well, we'll turn around and we'll convince everybody that you're awful unless you pass the law. And frighteningly enough, they often succeed. You find that they'll actually go and they go to your home state and you'll see these advertisements. It'll be like, your congressman is a terrible person and should be shot in the street. And then everybody's all mad and they have to get rid of the person. So drug companies, they have a lot of influence on politics and they have a lot of weird control. And they constantly jack up prices as well. So you've got the hospital and the people doing the diagnosis are raising prices just to a ridiculous extent. And then you've got drugs also raising prices to a ridiculous extent. And then you've also got medical device manufacturers. And this was an interesting bit of politics because medical device manufacturers used to not be taxed at all. But the margins on their products, and when I talk about medical devices, I'm talking about like MRI machines and things like that. People think about like neck braces when you talk about medical devices or like a wheelchair. But you get into stuff like MRI machines and other complex devices that are used in hospitals. And they sell those for just ludicrous amounts of money. And this is actually part of the reason where sometimes you get into hospital things, and hospitals are price gouging. But they're also being price gouged. So when they buy pills and everything, they buy them at they're being gouged to a stupid extent. The pills are way too expensive, they cost way too much, and they're just, they have to pony up for that. And the medical devices are the same way. They're getting gouged on the medical devices. So one thing that they tried to do to pay for Obamacare was tax the sale of medical devices. And this was another thing, this was one that they got up in arms on this, and they were like, this is why people think that when they think medical devices, they think common crap that the consumer buys, because that's how they sold it. They're like, they're going to tax your ability to buy a wheelchair and things like that, and they made this seem like it was going to be some huge financial burden on people. And really, it was just going to cut into the bottom line a bit of these medical device manufacturers, and so another bit of weird politics there. But that's kind of another place where the money stacks up and things get out of control. So yes, the entire thing, it's just a bit of a mess. Oh yeah, I was going to talk about ambulances as well. Ambulances. A lot of people don't realize that ambulances, many of them are actually privately owned. They are not always necessarily owned by the hospital. In fact, frequently they're not. There are a lot of private ambulance companies, and ambulances are seen very favorably by the public. So they get away with a lot of crap. If you get into the politics of actual ambulances and things like that, they have a lobby, and nobody wants to hurt ambulances. Those guys are the first people that show up. When you choke on a chicken wing and you need somebody to come down and verify that you died from a chicken wing, they will be there. They're the first people to show up. And they'll pick you up and they'll ride you. But you sometimes hear from people who don't have, even people who have insurance, if you have to go to the hospital, you are better off asking your friend to drive you than you are hiring an ambulance. Because ambulances, they're not a public service, they're a private thing. And in some states, and this really does depend on where you live, but in some states, if your insurance doesn't pay the full bill, they can actually come after you for whatever the remaining price is. So this is interesting. You occasionally hear these horror stories about ambulances coming to rescue somebody. Especially helicopter ambulances. If they have to fly you somewhere, oh god, you may as well have flown to Europe. Because the prices are just ludicrous. There was one story I read about where somebody got charged $20,000 to be evacuated by air to a hospital. They were out in Yellowstone National Park or something like that. So they had a helicopter come in and was just yeah. And so what happened was his insurance paid the helicopter $4,000. And then the helicopter company was like, oh great, all right, well we'll go hit this guy up for another $16,000. And that was legal. They just sent him a bill for $16,000. He didn't ask for them to send a helicopter. They just came for him and then they charged him. So $16,000. I want you to think about that. It doesn't cost more than $3,000 to fly to Europe during Christmas. I mean, like, you could fly to Europe in the busiest time of the year and not pay that much money. That's like a 7-hour flight, something like that. But like a single helicopter evac, $20,000, and they can charge you for it whether you wanted them to pick you up or not. Like, you could have been like, no, just leave me to die. But they'll pick you up and they'll take you anyway. They won't listen to you. Like, they'll take you to the hospital. So you get stuck with these horrific bills. And some states forbid them from doing that, but some states let them. So ambulances, like I said, this is another thing that's weird. It's like a regulatory thing. Ambulances also need to be clamped down on. They're making ludicrous profits on the stuff that they do. When it costs thousands of dollars to pick somebody up and drive them to the hospital, it's pretty extreme. I mean, like, ambulances aren't like, they're, I don't know what their breaking point is as far as income is, but they are another service in the medical industry that is just out of control. And no politician is willing to touch ambulances because as soon as you go like, yeah, I'm going to crack down on first responders, people will come for you with torches and pitchforks. So this is another problem. You just can't solve it politically. Like, it would be so easy to annihilate any politician who tried to solve the problem. So, so our healthcare system, it's like this big amalgamation of just terrible problems, powerful lobbies, and groups that are seen favorably in politics that are hard to fight, like doctors, lifesavers, first responders, things like that. People who have the good faith of the public and really can't lose it, because whenever they tear your arm or your leg off to save your life, they stick it to your health insurance company. And then your health insurance company later comes along and tries to tell you, like, well, I'm not paying for that. Like, I'm not paying for this hospital bill. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that. And then you get mad at your health insurer. So like, we're able to attack our health insurers, relentlessly. Everybody is mad. And so this is one thing. This is why a lot of people believe that single-payer healthcare, and this might actually be true, but it's possible that single-payer healthcare, if it's not corrupted by the way the political system works, would be the only way to get healthcare under control in the U.S., because at that point you would finally just have the government directly negotiating prices on everything. And one thing that Obamacare did that was really interesting was that although it didn't fix any of the real problems facing our medical system today, it did make it to where people now think of medicine as a government problem. So now when medicine is too expensive and it's crushing the economy of the whole country, we turn around and we say, what are you doing, government? Because the government have a hand in the thing now. They have Obamacare, and we think that they're supposed to be solving it. So we've kind of got this shift in the way that people think about medicine. The Republicans kind of want to repeal the thing, but we've passed a point now. A lot of analysts think where now everyone thinks of the government as being involved in healthcare, and they think that the government should be fixing healthcare. So what the Republicans wanted to do is they wanted to repeal it, so that people wouldn't have that opinion. They wouldn't feel like government was involved in healthcare. They wanted people to take up their beef with their insurer, and their insurer would continue to just, fight with the whole rest of the medical world. And it's interesting because if you look at like who's making the most obscene profits, it's actually not your insurance companies. In fact, quite a few insurance companies, at first, the stocks on a lot of insurance companies went up when Obamacare came out because they were like, oh, we're going to get these government subsidies and we're going to get a bunch of people signed up. And then it turned out that like the people that got signed up were sick. And they were like, oh man, we can't afford to like treat people. Like, we can't afford medicine. Holy crap. Have you seen the cost of this stuff in the US? Like, oh my God. So, which gives you really an idea of how bonkers our system is. Even with subsidies, like our health insurers are just like, I can't afford to pay for drugs. Like, oh my God, no, like this is never going to work. So a bunch of those insurers, when Obamacare rolled out, they actually started bleeding money because the people that signed up for their programs were like sick and needed healthcare, and healthcare is totally unaffordable. So, insurance companies. While they are terrible in a lot of ways, and they're constantly trying to wriggle out of helping you, and many people actually sold essentially scam insurance prior to Obamacare. I mean, they still have some scams that go on. For example, they're switching over to a lot of high deductible plans, which are freaking worthless to most people. I mean, like I was talking to this lady with her parents who don't have health care. One of the reasons they don't have health care is because there's a $4,000 deductible on like the most affordable plan, and so you wind up paying in some $2,000 in installments, in your monthly installments or whatever, and then going to the hospital cost you $4,000, which the insurance just wouldn't cover. So as long as you don't have to go to the hospital more than on, the rare occasion, it's still saving money to not get health care at all. Like, it's just a bit of a gamble. If you wind up going to the hospital twice, then it becomes a little too expensive. Or if you wind up on regular maintenance meds, that's too expensive. But currently, like, insurance is doing everything that it can to try to stay afloat in a system that is gradually trying to crash the entire economy. And it's funny because when I say like they're trying to crash the entire economy, I'm not really exaggerating. There's a real kind of broken window problem going around with healthcare in the U.S. Basically, like if you look at like social costs, people talk about like, oh, food stamps and whatever. Like, you get these people who are like, oh, they're basically robbers. They're living on my dime. Food stamps cost each individual person, like every taxpayer, it's like $1 or something like that. Some minor amount. Like, food stamps are nothing. What is exhausting our social system, our ability to pay for people, is not food stamps. It's Medicaid, Medicare, and TRICARE. It's the government healthcare plans, because healthcare is so obscenely expensive. And what's funniest though is that people on those programs, like, they oftentimes, like, especially like Medicare, not so much, because people fall into what's called the donut hole, where the insurance like stops covering. And this was a method to try to save the government from going bankrupt, actually, which is really frightening. Is they have this system called the donut hole, where once you spend enough money, the government will just like suddenly be like, oh, now you have no benefits for a little while. And so you have to go for like a certain stretch where you just don't have benefits, basically. You don't have like insurance. You just have to pay out of pocket. And then after you cross that certain threshold, then you go back to having like good insurance again. It's weird. Medicaid doesn't do that. Medicaid just pays like in full for virtually everything, because Medicaid recognizes that you are disabled, or you're in the poverty line or whatever, so it doesn't try to get you to do that. And then TRICARE is, of course, military insurance, and TRICARE is pretty good. I believe it varies somewhat, but from my experience working with TRICARE in the pharmacy, TRICARE was always very good insurance. I got a good deal on it. But the trouble is, it's objectively maybe one of the worst kinds of healthcare as far as spending goes, because it's just tapping the vast resources of the U.S. Treasury. And they seem to not really care exactly how much money is going into it. And so that one's really weird. You hear about doctors abusing Medicare government programs all the time. And so when I talk about like hospitals abusing stuff, one thing that hospitals do is like every time a doctor pokes his head into your room, like I've seen people who are like, oh yeah, man, like you'll see conflicting reports from people to be like, oh yeah, the bedside manner was terrible. Like, I went in there, almost never saw a doctor. They just checked in to make sure I was like at the bare minimum level of health. But then you have someone who goes in there and they're like, oh yeah, they were amazing. Like, a doctor came in like 3 times a day. They were testing my blood every single day. And I'll ask them, and I'll be like, did you have a government plan? Did you have like a government plan? And they're like, yeah, I was on like Medicaid at the time, or I was on TRICARE. I was in the military, so I was on TRICARE. And I was like, yeah, there it is. There you go. Because what it is that those plans, those government plans, they don't clamp down on how much the hospitals can like take. So every time a doctor walks in the room, that's a bill. You get billed. So they come in and they bill you like multiple times. Whereas the private insurers see right through that, and they say, they say, oh, come on, like, you came into his room 3 times a day. He was in there for a week, and you're gonna charge us like $500,000? No, we're not paying that. And they get mad and they argue. So there are some benefits to private insurance. This is why I say, like, single payer is the only feasible way that we're going to get healthcare under control. But that's only if the government were able to act in a way that was in everyone's best interest, rather than just shoveling money into the system and being like, oh, I know, the lobbyists really wanted this law. But it's weird because we actually do pass laws, we pass regulations. And this is why the right and the left, like, they're often right about different things. Like, sometimes the right wing is correct about certain things, and sometimes the left wing is correct about certain things. Like I say, like, I agree with the left wing, we need single payer. But I agree with the right wing. The corruption in politics and the ridiculous way that we pass regulations really is going to prevent single payer from being viable. So we're in kind of a rock and a hard place, where the corruption prevents single payer from being useful. But you got to have that single payer. There's really not, unless you come up with some completely novel experimental solution, which nobody has yet, there's nothing you can do. So, yeah, like I say, occasionally they pass laws that say things like, we cannot negotiate. Like, we have passed a law, we cannot negotiate. Doctors get to claim as many royalties from us as they want, and that is the law, and that'll be the law until we pass another law. And that is no joke. They will actually do that. They pass a law forbidding themselves from negotiating. and they just wind up, making it an even bigger expense than it ever was. And again, yeah, you get into that too with like TRICARE is a good example of that, because you're like, oh, like military, like come on, they fought in the military, you got to provide for them, and so it's politically easy to make stupidity seem very appealing, as you just say like, oh, think of the troops, and they say like, oh, of course, yes, the troops, you're right, we shouldn't negotiate, we should let the doctors just come in as many times as they want and just reap as much money off the taxpayers' backs as they feel like. You're right, we'll do it for the troops. And it's like, it's not for the troops, it's for a corrupt portion of the medical system that is just taking advantage of the system. So the troops would get good insurance one way or the other. I mean, if the government could negotiate, then the government would just be negotiating. That's all behind closed doors anyway. Nobody actually knows about that stuff. You never see it on your bill. So yes, wacky. Some analysts think that we're doomed, and that they actually don't see a way to fix the medical system. Most likely, we're not going to see another realistic set of reforms until either the Democrats or the Republicans completely take over the House, Congress, and Senate. And in my opinion, we're probably not going to see a realistic reform from the Republicans. Not because the Republicans are necessarily against reform, because the problem being created by the medical system in this day and age is severe enough that even the Republicans really need to focus on it too. But because the Republicans seem to be so fractured, I'm not really sure what their approach would be. The only thing they seem to want to do is just kind of spite the Democrats. But aside from that, I don't know. They're fragmented up into such a mess, and I don't know. Things are so weird. And then the Democrats are not really they're not really a purer or a smarter kind of group, because like I say, they had that opportunity. They had the presidency in Congress and Senate, and they screwed it up by essentially trying to protect their own, special interests and everything like that, and just acting like your typical, stupid politicians, and just getting into this awful, insider, beltway politics crap. So yes, it's a mess. It is a thing, though. A lot of so many politicians are aware of it. It's just that nobody knows how to actually get into it and how to fix it. So the next time Obamacare rolls around for renewal, and you start seeing all these different kinds of articles about what is causing the problem in healthcare, and is Obama the devil? Did Obama bring down everything? Did he do all this and all that? It is far, 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 far more complicated. Both the left and the right have very legitimate complaints. They do so in a tribal way, in a stupid way, in a deconstructive, non-helpful way. But there are some valid arguments on both sides, and that's how it is. It's a mess. So yes, that's what I've been thinking about lately, and I suppose that'll be it for today. So thanks for joining me, everybody. I will catch you all next time.